So, hello. This is our third session on songs of spiritual awakening, or on the Dohas. So, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Very warm welcome to this session. The Dohas are songs about Dharma. Some of them are Dharma basics, some of them are very advanced. But all of them are part of the Bodhisattva's journey. So let's take this very necessary, vital, and wonderful moment to remind ourselves of our own refuge, our own bodhicitta, our own dedication and commitment to lead a life of integrity, a life of goodness, and a life of service to all of our fellow beings. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on until we reach the very heart of enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well. May they live long and be healthy. May they be well provided for. May they have good friends and find respect, and live in places of peace, places of plenty. And most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for those good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being totally beyond suffering, and attain the great equanimity that's free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamavati shameta shatru omkure marajite karote keyore tejuwati oloyane bishudane male malapa naye kukure kaka grase grasana hu muki paramuki amuki Shamme davane savagraha bandhanane megrihetva savabhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savidva buddha mudra anugatita sava mare butsarita parishuddhe bega shantu sava marakama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our head, on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. We are considering in these few teachings, these dohas, these songs of spiritual accomplishment, songs, sung teachings, versified sung teachings by the great masters, mainly of our Kagyu tradition. And just now, we're in some of the songs of Milarepa. Before that, we had Maitripa's song. and so on. So now we're in the songs of Milarepa. And so before we get launched into one or two or three of Milarepa's songs, let me share some context. I know I tend to get enthusiastic about history, so I have to, how can you say, rein myself in, as they say, like a horse that's too enthusiastic, you have to go, whoa. But it really is, it's so interesting. It's fascinating. So we're talking about the Kagyu tradition. But if we go back to Milarepa's time, what was it? It was a thin thread of teachings that came from India to Tibet with Marpa. But Marpa didn't go back to Tibet with lots of noise and a huge reception and thousands of people gathering to hear the new teachings, the new lineage that came from India. On the contrary, he went and lived quietly where he lived, which was sort of south of Lhasa, more or less if you have a clue where Lhasa is, and then you go down to the Nepali border, about halfway is the area of Lodra where Marpa lived. So he went back there, and even locally, nobody knew that he was a Buddhist guru. They thought he was a farmer. He was a guy who had a farm, and people came to visit him for teachings, but it was very selective, I suppose is the word. Only those with amazing karma came to him and received the various lineages that he'd spent over 20 years in India with some of India's greatest masters, Naropa, Maitripa, Kukuripa, and so on. And so the Kagyu lineage was in the hands of a handful of people in a farm in southern Tibet. There wasn't a Kagyu lineage spreading in Tibet. In fact, what was there in Tibet? Mainly the remains of the Nimapa lineage, which had been introduced 300-400 years before. So the history of that is fascinating. It's the story of Guru Rinpoche coming to Tibet and other great masters, not just Guru Rinpoche, with under King Trison Detsen, who had a huge empire, who'd unified Tibet, who had control over a large part of China and Himalaya. Really had a lot of money. So this was super financed Dharma implantation. The king brought one of India's best scholars, Shantarakshita. He brought Guru Rinpoche. He sent 500 bright kids to India to learn Sanskrit, to translate the scriptures. I mean, can you imagine it if it was these days? Translators like myself, who never trained as translators, trained as an engineer, and there we are. There's nobody else to do it, and somehow you've acquired some language. And so there's translators here, there. None of them. It's the problem. When you see all the other languages of the world and people who translate, there are basic rules which none of us learned. We just were all, on the hoof, off the cuff, all these English expressions, translators. So imagine finding 500 bright kids and sending them all for intense training. So it was huge. And Samye Monastery was built, and so on and so on. But in less than 100 years, another Tibetan king came along who was very anti-Buddhism, very pro-shamanism, and he literally destroyed monasteries, sent the Buddhists away beyond the borders of the kingdom. Huge destruction. Once he was dead, the lamas filtered back, but this huge explosion of Dharma had been very much watered down. And there was a lot of degradation. Some of the things remained good. Some of the things, had done to them what humans do to religion, which is not very good. Humans are humans with lots of human failings. So most of Tibet was either Nyingma tradition or Bumpo tradition. The Sakyapa tradition, which was coming, wasn't big. The Gelugpa tradition was going to come a few hundred years after Milarepa. The Kagyu tradition wasn't there. This is the world Milarepa was in. People he taught were either shamans, in a shamanistic tradition, Bumpo, or they were practicing whatever was left of the Nyingma tradition. That's the world he was in. And this Kagyu lineage was in his hands. It was given in its entirety to him by Marpa. Then he was told to go and meditate in solitude after he left Marpa. He was given a whole list of caves and retreats to go to. So if you don't mind, let's have a quick look at that on a map. Okay, so I want to share this map. Can you wave a hand if you can see a map? See a map? Yep, good. Okay, so what do I want to do? Maybe this. Oh, I've got the little windows. I've got 2, 4, 6 of you covering up Lhasa. But anyway, if you look on this map, if you look, I don't know what you can see. I can't move a cursor. To the left, sort of middle, far left. That's where Milarepa was born, right? You might see Annapurna, Manashu, Lomangtang. West of Tibet, that's where Milarepa was born. He traveled a lot before he met Marpa. So he met Marpa, that's on the right of the map. I don't know what you can see on the right. I see you, I see people. So that's where he spent time with Marpa, southern central Tibet, south of Lhasa. Then, if you know his story, he got a huge, urgent, unstoppable desire to go back to his homeland to check out his parents. So he went all across this map from south of Lhasa, on the one, there are not many roads in Tibet even now, through Shigatse and off to western Tibet, where he found just the ruins of his house and the bones of his parents and so on. After that, he had to go to the places, a whole list of places that Marpa had told him to meditate in. And so in the red circles, you get the kind of area he was in, either near Mount Everest, or today our songs are around Nyanyang, which is, if you know Nepal, you see the lower red circle, that's Kathmandu. If you go up from Kathmandu, sort of northeast, you take a plane to what's today called Namche Bazaar. From Namche Bazaar, you're in, that's where you go to Everest Base Camp, where you see all the wonderful high mountains. So this area where those top 2 red circles are, is where Milarepa spent a lot of the last part of his life. It's very nice because you're on the down south slopes of the Himalayas. So you can go where it's a bit warmer, where there are monkeys, where there are fruit trees, and and then you can go a bit higher, and even he spent some time on the slopes of Everest and with those very, very high mountains. In his hands was the entire Kagyu tradition, in the hands of a wandering yogi who lived in caves. No monasteries, not a lot of noise, not thousands of people. And he had, it said, two main disciples, like the sun and the moon, Gampopa and Raichungpa, and he passed on, not just he passed on his lineage to them, but they practiced it to the point of enlightenment. That's why they're like the sun and the moon. And then 25 key yogi disciples. And then today, eventually, we're going to come to one of the disciples, who's called Langom Repa. Langom is interesting. So while we're still on the map, where did Langom Repa come from? He came from the far right of this map, south of Lhasa, from a mountain range, a mountain range called Daklagampo. I don't have a pointer on this map. How can I get out of? I'll do this. Oh yeah, can you see a pointer wandering around? Yeah. So over here on the right, there is this mountain range south of Lhasa called Daklagampo. Very deserted region, barren mountains, lots of caves. So he'd come from there all the way over to here. Now this is a long way, right? This is weeks, months on foot to get to where Milarepa was, because he wanted teachings. Once he got the teachings, he went all the way back to his own area, Daklagampo. Later on, Gampopa came to Milarepa, and where Milarepa sent him to practice was that same mountain range. So he had that long journey. Milarepa sent him there, and he said, go there and you will fulfill your activity. Activity means teaching, usually in that language. So let's get out of the map. And so that sounded weird. You fulfill your activity of teaching people, and he sent him to a deserted mountain range and said, you meditate there. So when he got there, he connected with this Langom Repa that I just told you about, whose song we'll see. First, Langom Repa became his sponsor, looked after him, fed him. And then he became Gampopa's disciple. But there was how can you say, a connection, a geographic connection, a people's connection. This Langom Repa is one of the 25 key disciples. And I just wanted to show you the map to give you some idea of what's going on where. I don't know if it's interesting, but maybe that's enough of that and the history. But the point is, Gampopa joined up with Langom Repa, who looked after him, established him there in these remote caves. And then simply by the power of Gampopa's karma, people started coming. By the end of Gampopa's life, 52,000 people had come to Gampopa. And so this lineage that was so fragile in the hands of Milarepa, traveling as a yogi in caves with his 2 plus 25 main disciples. When it's taken by Gampopa, then already he has over 50,000 disciples, and amongst them the first Karmapa. So then the first Karmapa had even perhaps more powerful karma than Gampopa, because he establishes the first monastery in central Tibet, then he goes to eastern Tibet, and he has an influence in what today we call China, which wasn't China then, but anyway, that's another story, that's history. So there the Kagyu lineage really starts getting monasteries, tens, hundreds of thousands of people. It has an influence over central Tibet, eastern Tibet, China. Then we can talk about, the Kagyu lineage in Tibet. So let's come back to now Milarepa and the Dohas. I hope that was interesting and gives you some idea. If you go deeper into it, it's wonderful. But anyway, why Milarepa went here and there, and why he got fed up with this place, because so then he said that's enough and went off somewhere else. And also he had this checklist from his guru of all the places he had to go and bless with his presence and his meditation. So last week we had one of Milarepa's songs of the 6 paramitas, and this was in a place an area called Nyanyang. It's quite a big area, and it's the area where the 2 top red circles were on the map. It's where you can see Everest and these huge mountains. Those mountains are too high and too difficult mainly to live in for most people. So he was in the villages on the Tibetan plateau, so you're already above 3,000 meters, but in the valleys below those huge mountains. And Nyanyang was a place Milarepa spent a lot of time, and he came and he went back. So the 6 paramitas song I gave you last time was actually in his last time he went to an area called Drin, and it was an instruction he gave to everyone about the 6 paramitas. We're going to go on from that today in this first one to another version of the 6 paramitas. And so normally when we have a song, we have a context. Here the story of the context is long, but very, very indicative of the world that Milarepa was teaching in. So it's the story of 2 scholars called Dzogchen and Darlo. And they were in this area now. But even today, there are very few roads in Tibet because of the landscape. There's the road that goes down into Nepal and that comes up through those areas I indicated on the map where he spent a lot of time, and that goes sort of up into Tibet, then turns right and goes across to Shigatse and then to Lhasa. You don't have alternatives. That's the way you go. There's no other road. Everyone follows those roads. So Milarepa had gone down that road quite a way to meet Rechungpa, who was coming back from India. That's Rechungpa's story. But because it was a key road, then there was a big monastery in the area where Milarepa was staying. And it was a monastery that had a shedra, a monastic college, and the monastic college had its teachers. Then Milarepa came to the area, and he was a hit. And people really liked him, and they went to him. And I don't know how much exposure you've had to Tibetan people, but Tibetan lay people are very Tibetans in general, they're very one-pointed. I mean, Tibetan teachers I met, especially one of them, Lama Gendan, he'd spent 23 years in solitary retreats in caves. He was amazing. And like Milarepa, Milarepa lived off nettles. Lama Gendan lived off raw turnips, just to keep his digestive tract going. And he'd been so long in silence, he lost his voice. He had a tiny little voice like this, because he'd not spoken for so many years. And he was like Vajradhara. His presence was like blue light. It was amazing. He was one of the great yogis of the last century of Tibet. So anyway, he said, Westerners are amazing. They've got minds which go everywhere. And so they know so much. He says, Tibetans, they're like this. They do one thing. They can focus. And they can really focus, and they really do that well. Give them one thing and then they do it. So he said, Western minds, he said, Tibetans' minds, they're really thick-skulled. It takes a lot to get something in, but once it's in, it's in. He said, Westerners, they're so sensitive, they're so reactive. And in a way, they understand things so quickly, but then their mind goes somewhere else. So he saw this kind of, this very, very different mentality between Tibetans in general and Westerners in general. So the Tibetans, now they have Milarepa in the area and some of his disciples. He was really flavor of the year. So they were all going to him, and the local monastery was losing its offerings, to put it bluntly. Now, although money and offerings and wealth are not important for Buddhists, if you have a monastery, they are important, because you've got hundreds of mouths to feed. You've got to keep the whole thing going. It doesn't come from nowhere. It's not like Buddhism in India, where people can wander around the village with their begging bowls. Very, very different social system. It relied on people after the harvest bringing food, sackfuls and sackfuls of food to last through the winter. Winter where you can't travel, you can't go around begging and so on. So it really is, and it still is, a problem for Tibetan monasteries that you've got to have supplies. And so what happened in that area, I hope this isn't too long, but anyway, I'm trying to make the story short, but it's a long story, is they had poor crops for a couple of years, and the people were in a state, and they went to the monastery and said, can you help us? Can you lend us money? And when we come to the next harvest, we'll bring it back. And the people running the monastery, who were a bit peeved at their own loss of income, said, we can't lend you money. You're all giving offerings to Milarepa and his people and taking food to them. Sorry, we can't help. And in fact, they were really quite upset. They said, since these don't know what word they said, but the feeling you get from the text is weirdos, have come. They don't teach Buddhist philosophy, they don't have a monastery, they're just there, they beg, they sound like they've got really deep realization, but who the hell knows? And people love them. I said, we've got to get rid of them. Basically, the conclusion was they held a meeting, a monastic meeting, and said, we've got to get rid of them. And they thought the only way they could get rid of them was to shame them away from the area. So they decided to go up there and challenge their knowledge, which two of them did. So one was called Loten and the other's called Darlo. And they're really quite upset at Milarepa. So they turn up where he is and they say, we want to see if you really are Buddhist. So we want to test your knowledge and tell us about this. And he sings some songs about Real Dharma knowledge is knowledge of yourself. It's not knowledge of books. It's not knowledge of ideas. It's knowing your mind and the essence of your mind. And they said, yeah, all very well, all of that, but nevertheless, you ought to know about. And they said, tell us about this topic and that topic. And Milarepa didn't comply to what they wanted and churn out lots and lots of information which they wanted to test him on. He gave them instructions that would, if they listened, be helpful to them. But they just got more and more upset and thought he was avoiding the issue because he was ignorant and stupid. So there's two of them, Loten and Darlo. Darlo is just getting more and more upset at these, what for him were attractive charlatans, stealing their customer base. So he's more and more upset. Loten has doubts. He thinks what this Milarepa is saying is very true. I wonder if he's really got all the accomplishments that people say he has. So anyway, the story's long, but the gist of it is Loten goes back to his monastery and he does weird things to his shrine. He turns images upside down. There's offering bowls, some of which should have wine in them, some of them should have milk in them, and he puts the milk in the wine bowl and all of this kind of thing. He thought, if he's clairvoyant, if he's got siddhis and power, he'll know about this. And so they go back, the two scholars, another time, because their point is they want to shame Milarepa in front of people so that he's so embarrassed he goes away and they get their customer base back and they're the stars of the show and they get the income too and the support. And so they both go back. And Milarepa says straight away to Loten, there's no need to do those weird things to your shrine. A shrine's a shrine. You should treat it with respect and put the right things in the right place just to test me. So Loten thinks, oh, gosh, this guy's really got clairvoyance. But Darlo thinks, no, he's just a shaman who's got a few clairvoyant tricks. But he's not really an accomplished Buddhist master. He's not enlightened. He's not gone through the stages of the path and achieved them. And so they have those two different reactions. Loten goes away, and eventually, as time goes by, he becomes a disciple of Milarepa. Darlo is just more and more angry. So at one point, he's asking Milarepa, look, if you're really a Buddhist, you must at least be able to explain the 6 paramitas. And I think most of you have studied the 6 paramitas, and you know that the Buddhist details are wonderful. There's so many details. Generosity, 3 types of generosity: material generosity, giving your time and support and protection from fear, and the third one, the gift of Dharma. In these, the first one, subsections, there's all of these things which tell you how in detail what to give, when to give it, what not to give, how your mind is, how your thoughts are, respect for the gift. This is what Darlo wants to hear. Does this guy really know about this? And so Milarepa, instead of giving all the details, gives the shortest teaching on the 6 paramitas you'll ever come across, right? And it is wonderful because he puts his finger on the heart of it, the essence of each of the paramitas. The point being, what? You can practice generosity according to all the details and just get more and more egotistic. The generous bodhisattva, who will give everything, and who's seen to give everything. But basically, it's boosted the delusion of ego. I'm a bodhisattva. You've got the medals. You've got the campaigns. I gave here. I renounced here. You've got all the campaign medals, and you've become a general of generosity. But your ego is so solid. So anyway, let's look at the song and see what he says. So he starts, before he sings this, saying, my Guru, Lord Mapa, who is so kind, please be a refuge for sentient beings in this polluted age. He's talking there about the pollution that's in the monasteries at the time. Grant your blessings that Dharma may now pacify jealousy. He's addressing Darlo directly. Jealous Darlo. Listen, Darlo, you teacher wishing for fame while never recollecting that you'll die. You've pondered over words' connections and words' contradictions. 32 years of your life have passed without you even noticing. If you could really practice now, that would be excellent. But in this time of deterioration, the afflictions are gross, impossible to bear for those with negativity. I can really imagine this, I think I've told you over the last couple of years one story from Samiling. We had a Zen master, Soshu Suzuki. He was at the time, deputy abbot of Ryutakaji Monastery, and later on became the abbot. And he was giving sessions in Samiling, 1973. And we were in a session. He didn't have much English, but at the end of one session, he took a few questions. And one guy asked a question, and all of a sudden, Soshu, he just became wrathful. It was scary. All of a sudden, this sort of quiet master, and he shouted at the person, 300 year, you ask me same question, I give same answer, you'll not understand. And we're just like all, And this guy, it was like, this is your blockage. This thing you don't get. So I can imagine Milarepa talking to Darlo. He says, 32 years have gone by, and you've been studying words, their contradictions, their interconnected meaning. You haven't really got it. You haven't really practiced. You're just full of jealousy. That's why you're here, to get rid of me. So then he gives the teaching. There is no perfection, paramita, of generosity other than dispelling clinging to me, me, me. If we get rid of the me and the I, that's the essence of all the details of practice of generosity in each situation. Why is it you give? It's because you're no longer obsessed with yourself, more and more concerned with others. So he says this, that's it. There is no perfection of right conduct other than ending deceit and hypocrisy. So when we study right conduct, then we see all the vows, the pratimoksha vows, the bodhisattva vows, and all that they involve about purity, about Right conduct's all about you and other people. What is purity? What is integrity? What is ethics? What is true morality? So there's all the details. Monks like Darlo, in theory, they're keeping more than 200 vows. And they have the instructions about what those vows involve. So he said, but there is no perfection, paramita, of right conduct, other than ending deceit and hypocrisy. And this goes so deep. These days, it's what we'd say you have an agenda, a behind-the-scenes agenda. And instead of that, you are what we might call these days WYSIWYG. You know WYSIWYG, computer term. What you see is what you get. So a genuine Dharma ethical person, there's no agenda. They're not telling you one thing, showing you one face, where behind that there's something else going on. The psychology of this is, it's immense. It's immense. It's the face, the mask we put onto the world. And then there's what we really want inside, what we want, what we're after. And so, again, the whole point of Dharma is getting rid of the delusion, the mistake of ego. So we can become the ideal monk. You keep all the vows. You're very immaculate in everything that seems to be. In this story with Darlo, and I'm interrupting the middle of the explanation of the 6 paramitas, but one thing you should know, because he was so jealous and persistent and upset, that arguing and talking was never going to convince him. Milarepa had this, he was enlightened. Rechumpa, who'd just come back from India and who was there, was highly enlightened. Not quite so much as Milarepa, and they had a total, telepathic contact. So Milarepa knew, and Rechumpa knew, that Darlo had a girlfriend in the village, and that he'd given her his mala as a love gift, not as a Dharma gift. He'd given her bracelets and so on. And so Milarepa and Rechumpa just knew this. They just knew it. And Milarepa wanted to expose, Rechumpa wanted to expose Darlo in front of everyone. And Milarepa looked at him and, no, don't do it. But Milarepa thought this guy's going too far. Rechumpa thought this guy's going too far. So he did it anyway. He went over into the audience, and the girl was there, and he held up her wrist, which had the love gifts from Darlo, and Darlo went completely red, and everybody understood that he wasn't so pure as he seemed to be. But he looked, the projection, the mask, was, I am a excellent monk, excellent Buddhist teacher, and so on. So when we look at ourselves, this deviousness, this twistedness, where we are projecting one image of ourselves to the world, which isn't who we really are, what we're really after. There's so much to learn here about ourselves. It's part of our, very valid part of our journey. And then in Sanskrit, there's this word rishi. Rishi, you've come across rishi, like Maharishi and rishi, which when they translated that into Tibetan, they translated the meaning. And the meaning is Dransong. Its translation is Dransong, which means gone straight, become becomes straightforward. What you see is who they are. What you see is what you get. There is no background agenda. So he's saying, other than ending every form of deceit and hypocrisy, there's no other right conduct. It's all about that. And then for the perfection of forbearance, many people call it patience, the whole point, the key point, is there's no other perfection of forbearance other than not fearing absolute truth, because absolute truth, the true nature of mind, is without ego. When you're there, ego never even existed. The whole thing is just terrible illusion that got you into trouble, but even that's gone, like last night's dream. So this being in the absolute, where there's everybody, and everybody's Buddha. Everybody has Buddha nature. And your being is there to serve. Other than being in that true state, it's the absolute truth, the real truth, not the delusion of ego, then there is no other forbearance. So that all the details of forbearance, how to put up with this person's anger, how to put up with the frustration of illness, how to deal with all of life's challenges, so many details, but the essence of it is being able to be who we truly are, what we truly are. And same for diligence. There is no perfection of diligence other than never departing from the practice. And so, again, all the different teachings, 3 types of diligence. Diligence, the opposite of wasting your time. How do we waste our time? Through laziness and through, there's all the details of that. But in the essence of it, everything you do is practice. When you eat, you're practicing. Your food is an offering. When you walk, you're practicing. So if you do the preparations for Mahamudra and you do the Mundro, when you get to Guru Yoga, then we learn how to make everything, walking, sleeping, eating, thinking, whatever we do, everything becomes practice, either in the form of prayer or offering or direct realization, mindfulness. And some of our great teachers, like Akon Rinpoche, he didn't teach mindfulness, blah, blah, blah. He was mindfulness. When you watched him, everything he did so beautifully, so mindfully. It was just wonderful. So other than everything we do becomes practice, we know how to make everyday things practice. That's the real perfection of diligence. Remember, he's talking to Darlo. For them, diligence, giving Dharma teachings, doing this, building monasteries, there is a lot of infrastructure, Dharma. And these days, in our time, there is a lot of, say, wonderful Dharma. He did this, he founded so many monasteries, filled them with statues, gave these teachings and all of that. But the whole point is not out there, how diligently you do things, but it's in here how nothing is separate from practice. Likewise with meditation, there is no meditation other than the mind dwelling forever within. And we're going to come back to this in the next song with Langom Repa, because that's the essence of everything we're doing. The mind that learns to go, what in our language we call within, right? when you explore within, as a real explorer, you'll find that the deeper you go within, then there is no longer an inside and an outside. But from where we are, meditation takes us within ourselves, within your mind. That's you. Nobody else goes there. Everybody else sees manifestations of your mind. They hear what you say. They see the expressions on your face. They see what you do. But your mind is your private territory. And it's the laboratory we go into to research and discover who we really are, and that we really are Buddha. So that we call this going within, as opposed to what's out there: people, life, politics, society, food, clothing, comfort, the things, they say, of our five senses, because that's what out there is. It's what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching as the world. And we think of it as other than ourselves. We don't think of it as my experience, what my brain is seeing, what my brain is hearing. We don't think of it as inside. So there's a difference between outside and inside for us. So he says, meditation, when we study meditation, so many meditations, all about stabilizing the body, stabilizing the mind, shamatha, different types of shamatha based on shamatha, vipassana. It's just so much. He's saying the whole point is that we are always within. Well, that word has some sense. We're not drawn away by what seems to be other people, life. And then sixth, there is no perfection of prajna paramita, deep wisdom. Now, Darlo, remember, Darlo is the abbot. He's the head of the monastic college. That's the big blah blah of Buddhism, prajna paramita. And to be on top of that, you need a lot of study, a lot of blah blah, a lot of ideas that from Nagarjuna and so on show the meaning of shunyata, voidness, non-existence of this. So all that kind of stuff, that's his speciality. Oh, there's lots of all of that, years of study. And Milarepa said, whatever it is, the whole point is only one thing. It is to realize your true nature. And Milarepa's done this and Darlo hasn't. Milarepa's realized Buddha mind, and Darlo spent, what did he say, 32 years of studying ideas, philosophy, dialectics, all of that. So that's Milarepa's, this wonderful teaching on the six paramitas. It's very short. You can learn it by heart. And then whenever you are practicing generosity, meditation, we can always remember this is what it's really all about. The rest is the details, but those details can be rechanneled into ego. All of them. So this is the point. It's the point that Darlo has not got and that Milarepa has got. So as he's teaching this, and because Ray Trungpa has exposed the fact that the very, how can you say, proper-looking Darlo isn't all he seems to be. He's got an agenda, he's got a girlfriend, and so on like this. It really made Darlo very, very more angry and upset. So Milarepa concludes, when one practices with meaning in such a way there is little need for the sounds of 1,000 words. All the words, all the philosophy, if you practice 6 paramita like that, that's all you really need. So I hope that's helpful. And I just do quickly the Tibetan transmission. So you've got the Tibetan. Je drajurmapa kudrin chen, kunik mesim chen chaptu sol, che drato shibara jinjelo, che lodake tampadalo nyen, michi nyampe nyanyela, Galdral siglasam samni, tse sumni zepach matsorda, tanyen yamlen chenale, juning me semchen yamora, medikchen kalazolame, Tadazim pangpe parona, jimpa chawalo nyame, yoju pangpe parona, sultim chawalo nyame, danla mitra parona, sopa chawalo nyame. Nyamyan drame parona, sandra chawalo nyame. Nangla nepe parona, samten chawalo nyame. Nelol tope parona, sharab chawalo nyame. Chetse soje parona, tapshe chawalo name, doshe chopa parona, tobshe za lo name, danye drupe parona, malam chawalo name, yamoransa repana, yeshe chawalo name. Danyam sulena de taraye, sikdom pedrala, Shesumso. Okay, so there we had a brief look at this encounter with Darlo. It's a long story. If you've got a copy of the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa, you can enjoy all of it. And but what we're looking at, I mean, let's try and make this interesting for us today. There we're looking, and I explained it a little bit, at who Milarepa was, the time he lived in, where he was teaching, what was going on. But today, then, we have so many manifestations of Dharma. There is the monastic world. There are Dharma centers, which are not quite the monastic world. I mean, if you've been to India, you've been to Tibet, and where it is just monasteries of all monks or nunneries of all nuns. That's where and how the Dharma has been mainly preserved for 1,000 years. It's wonderful, wonderful that the teaching has been kept alive in so many thousands of ways, in so many techniques, methods, the formal teachings of Buddhism, the Mahayana that was in India, has been preserved thanks to the monasteries. That's kind of the body. Within the monasteries, some monks, a minority, study to the full. They do 6 years, 9 years, 12 years of monastic college. Others go to retreat 3 years, 6 years, their whole life. So without that whole system that provides a population capable of studying, capable of meditating, the Dharma would have been lost. And it's thanks especially to the revival that happened at the time of Milarepa, when the Kagyu tradition came from India, when the Sakya tradition came from India, and when the teachings of Atisha came, that eventually, a few centuries later, became the Gelugpa tradition. That renewal of a Dharma that had become in many ways decadent in the 1100s. And then the monastic system has kept Dharma alive. The Dharma that was in India, the Dharma that the Buddha gave. It's wonderful. But then monasteries are monasteries, and they're what our great Rinpoches call white samsara, or light, samsara light. You've got samsara heavy, like Coca-Cola heavy, or like the original Coca-Cola with cocaine in it, and sugar and all the rest of it. And then you've got Coca Light. So monasteries have their own samsara, their pecking order, people with jealousy and aggression, and that's how it really is. People are people. They're not all saints. Monasteries with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people in them. It's a whole samsara light. So then, if we go back to India or go to Tibet, there are those who not just renounce life to go to the monasteries, but renounce the monasteries to become yogis. Because the monasteries is security. You've got a home. Okay, it's not your home, where you've got the title deeds, but you've got a home. And you get fed, and you get fed regularly, and you've got friends. In monasteries, people have friends, buddies. They've got enemies, animosity, and all of that. You leave that just the way the Buddha left the palace, and you go to where 24/7 there's you, your teacher, and practice. That's it. The rest is minimalized. You live in a cave, you live in a hut. Your food, whatever you can get. Everything is practice. So the yogic way is the cream of the cream, if everything is practiced properly. And we learn about it through Milarepa's songs. But we should because we love it, and because we see how wonderful it is. We shouldn't make the confusion of that's who you are. I want to tell you about my local grocer 20 years ago. He looked like and he dressed like Elvis Presley. He had the clothes and the hairdo. And it was just amazing. You could go to buy whatever packet of noodles. And it's like Elvis Presley serving you. But he wasn't Elvis Presley. And so we might really love and be inspired by. And if it's a singer or something, wonderful voice, wonderful. They wrote amazing songs and so on. But we mustn't confuse that love and respect with who we are and where we are in reality just now. And so we shouldn't make our love of yogis in any way make us look down on the monastic life, on the wonderful people who keep the vows, who go to the Kshetras and who learn all the Dharma philosophy, who give 6-9 years of their life to study so they can really understand Shunyata and so on. And just that is how Buddha's teaching has been kept alive. And we should place it right up there. And I remember visiting Theravada monasteries with the 16th Karmapa and how much respect he showed and how he told me off for not showing respect. Because I was thinking, oh, they're just Theravadas, Hinayana tradition, they're not even on the Bodhisattva path or the Vajrayana path. And he just looked at me in disgust, the 16th Karmapa. And he put his hand together and he bowed to them and he bowed to their images and said how wonderful it was. So this is very real. We have to be realistic and happy with who we are, but also be realistic with, like me, what a tiny worm I am compared with the wonderful beings I've met and who've taught me. I'm really nothing. I'm here as a Dharma teacher, but I know myself. I know what goes on in here. It's, well, I'm glad you don't know what goes on in there, because you'd be rather disappointed, very, very disappointed. So this is very real in our time. This dialogue between Milarepa's view and classical Buddhist monastic view as presented in all these 80,000 dharmas and all the different scriptures and so on. It gives us some interesting things to think about. So now I want to go on from that song to Langom Repa. I mentioned, I can't even remember, at the beginning of this talk or before the talk. So he's somebody so now we must be really at the end of Milarepa's life because his fame has spread. At the beginning, he was just in retreats, villagers knew about him, but his fame spread. From where he was near the Nepal, what in fact today is Nepal. It's not Tibet. It was the very north of Nepal, this southern side of the Himalaya, Mount Everest and so on. From where he was to where Langom Repa came from was a long way. Tibetans who sometimes they prostrate from their hometown to Lhasa. It takes them months. We're looking at months of journey. Now this Langom, Gom means he was a meditator. So his name was the great meditator of the Lan family. It was a family name. So he's somebody who'd been practicing Dzogchen in this Dakla Gompo mountain range south of Lhasa. He'd heard about Milarepa. Now he was already what they called locally a great meditator. He'd been years practicing Dzogchen techniques, Nimapa techniques. And he mastered them and he had results. But something inside him knew, but there's something missing. And maybe Milarepa can help me with what's missing. So he went these weeks, months of travel to where he'd heard Milarepa was. And so much happens just by word of mouth. If you don't mind me sharing my own memories. when I did the overland to India in 1970. There wasn't internet or any of this. There was only word of mouth. And so we were traveling east, meeting people coming back, and you just heard this about this place in Afghanistan, this place in India. You heard about, up in Darjeeling, near Darjeeling, there's Kalu Rinpoche. And it's just amazing how when there's nothing else, how that news travels. That's the beauty of gossip. Gossip can be a very, not very good thing. But this beautiful gossip was really the only thing we had. We had no other way of knowing where we were best off going, just by word of mouth. So this word of mouth about Milarepa had reached all the way to central Tibet, and this great Nyingmapa meditator went to him. So here we have a different relationship of Milarepa teaching. He's not teaching stubborn minds like Lotun and Darlo, who need convincing, who need miracles, who need something powerful. We're looking at somebody coming to him full of faith and a very open mind, ready to receive. And so when Langom Repa first gets to him, we won't go through the whole story, but he says, I've done this, I've been practicing these. He lists the Nyingmapa teachings. Now remember from last time, Milarepa, it seems, had spent about 10 years studying and practicing Dzogchen Nyingma teachings before he went to Marpa. And it was the last of his 9 Nyingmapa masters who actually sent him to Marpa, who recommended that he go to Marpa to get the next level of, teaching that he couldn't give himself. And so this master says, I've been doing this, but I feel there's more. And Milarepa, as an excellent master, teaching another master, puts his finger in the first songs he sings on exactly, what's wrong with Langom. And he said, he shows him, you've got Dharma and you've got the world. For you, there's the world, there's samsara, there's the villages, there's life, and there's your Dharma practice. You sit on your cushion, you do the Dharma practice, you visualize this, you work with your energies, your chakras, you do all these things. That's Dharma. And then out there's life. And between these two, there's a conflict. You're still a little bit fascinated with life. You still like to go to town. You like to pop in the town. There's a kind of an attraction, a bit of a buzz to it. And basically, you've got this conflict. Samsara, nirvana. Dharma, life. What happens on your cushion, what's going on out there. There was a movie, or probably a book, got a lovely title, Remains of the Day. I don't know if you ever came across it. Remains of the Day. What we are just now is the remains of our samsara. What's left? What's left of hundreds, thousands, who knows, of lifetimes of stories, out there. People, stuff, places you got attracted to, places you loved, places you detested, people you loved. Endless. Oh, God. So we are the remains of the day. We're what's left of all of that and all of the the aftermath. That's our karma. That's your story. That's my story. So he says basically to Langom, this really good meditator who's mastered so much, says you've still got this going on. There's the world and there's your cushion. There's Dharma, there's life. And so his key teaching is basically helping Langom to recognize the nature of mind, where there is no more inside and outside, where you are everyone and everything and everyone is what you are. And you become the loving, peaceful wisdom that can guide other people. And then there's no more samsara, nirvana, inside, outside. And so at first, Milarepa points out where Langom is still limited, I think is the best word, by his own mind. And it's so true that Langom is mind blown. So then he asks more questions based on that, and Milarepa gives him more advice. If you go to the 100,000 songs, you can follow the whole story. But where we're picking it up is in this brilliant, I think this is one of the most powerful, most complete, most inspiring of all of Milarepa's songs. You could spend a couple of years with this one, exploring it, applying it. So, what have I done with it? Maybe it's this one. Yeah. So, that's the one I sent out to those of you who've registered for the course. And you'll see it's not a misprint that the first couplet is centered and then the rest of the text is left margin. This first couplet is really what is the key point for everything follows. Jemala jepado jela solwande so Ramu Rangeshe Nemo Dandan Tempe Na Jonayande Troll with Jesu Drone Doma Tranchiche Gechapa Nam Yondo. The yogi who possesses the key point about the essential nature, through it being known as itself, by itself, is always happy. But the Dharma practicer who generates suffering after suffering by chasing after delusions is never at ease. At ease. At ease is nice. It means you're relaxed. He says, talking about happiness. Happiness, you are not in a state of peace. Like, nothing happening. What peace, peacefulness in meditation, in shamatha, means nothing's happening. Peace isn't something. Peace means nothing's happening. It's very sort of quiet. Nothing going on. Don't look for something. Nothing going on. Peace. There's that kind of peace. So quiet. Oh, and so sort of boring, but necessary as an antidote to busyness. We get out of busyness by that sort of peace. But the sort of peace we're talking about here is you are at ease. You're relaxed. You're relaxed with yourself. You're relaxed with everybody. And you're relaxed with what's going on. Because what's going on is karma, and there's only a very, very limited amount you can do about it. In politics, world situation, climate, all of that. Huge sufferings. Huge karma. But is it going to upset you? Are you going to add to the misery by becoming miserable yourself and upset? And then with a samsaric mind, you wish this politician was dead or something would happen to them. Or, is your mind going to become suffering because of the suffering that's inevitably witnessed? Because we're witnessing karma at work. No, you're at ease because you're wise. You know, given all the history behind each person, that's why they're doing to each other what they're doing. Personal karma, family karma, group karma, national karma. It's enormous. So you're at ease with it. And because you're at ease, then you can act wisely with compassion to do whatever you can do, if you can do something. More than that, you're at ease with yourself. You're okay about yourself. You've come to accept who you are. Ken, I'm a worm. I'm a little worm, but I'm a happy worm. I'm a worm that will become a butterfly one day. And so, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So that's fine. We are at ease with ourselves. And more than that, we are at ease with the shunyata truth of our Buddha nature and just the amazing, void, loving, wise, peaceful, compassionate nature of everything and everyone. So this at ease is what's in this first verse. And so in the second one, he says, chasing after delusions, we're never at ease. Our delusions, our projections of other people, of life, of situations, and our attraction and our repulsions, all of those complexities that make up what we call the ego or the self, make up you and me just now, the remains of the day, the relics of the past, the fallout from our history. So by chasing after by getting involved with these things, which seem other and external. This is the point he's making to Langom Repa. This is the big point. There is no other and external. There's only our own mind's experience. So he says, the yogi who possesses the key point, which is everything is mind. Mind is what the Guru points out in its true nature, about the essential nature of everything, every moment, whether it's horrible, whether it's beautiful, it's all mind. Simple example, a cinema projector, the white light from the bulb. That white light goes through the film, right? So if it's Donald Duck, whack, 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 you've got Donald Duck on the screen. If it's a horror film, you've got knives and blood and scariness and zombies or goodness knows what. If it's a love film, you've got and all of that kind of stuff. And if it's a fantastic film, then you're in some fantasy somewhere. All of that's on the which is interdependence, playing out your life. But behind that, you've got the white light. That white light is the nature of Donald Duck and horror films and all the rest of it. So with our mind in each moment, we learn to not be drawn into the moment, but to recognize the pure nature of our mind, thanks to our Guru's blessing and meditation instruction. So it says, the yogi who's got that. Now, when you do that, and you're in the true nature of mind, you don't recognize the true nature of your mind. It's not like observing the observer and then observing the observer of the observer and all of that kind of stuff. It's not like that. Ego shuts up. Your history shuts up. And Buddha mind is known by itself. So it says it knows what it is, as it is, all by itself. This is the transmission of Mahamudra. This is the transmission Milarepa gives to Langom. So if you do that, every moment you're happy because you're with Buddha. Yes, your Buddha mind is the truth of you. And we're not pulled into the daily, momentary delusions thrown up by our history. So the yogi who has that key point, happy, at ease all the time. But as soon as we get drawn into the details, and then we cling to this and we fight that, then you're never in that great ease, that great relaxation. Now we need to come back to that because I've run out of time. But you've got to remember, and that's what we'll come to next time in a fortnight's time, all being well, if we're all here in a fortnight, then what we'll come back to is what Langom Repa has been practicing, Dzogchen. And the claims it makes, and the instructions it gives, and so on. So we'll be looking into that next time. But this first verse will be key to all the other amazing verses that follow. It is really an incredible song, an incredible teaching given by an incredible master to an incredible student who afterwards is going to be an influence and a help to Gampopa in establishing our whole lineage. This is I just wish I could have been back there, just sitting on the sidelines, experiencing this happening. But I wasn't, so let's dedicate whatever was good in this session. May whatever virtue was created by our session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained, by the main enemy, our mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by its waves of rebirth, aging, sickness and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not yet arisen, and in those in whom it has arisen, may its development know no setbacks, no obstacles. On the contrary, may it increase ever more and more. And through our virtue may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. So, thank you. And now it's over to you. I'm just trying to adjust something I can't. Okay, never mind. Good. I welcome your comments, feedback, questions.
Ken?
Yes. Hello, Ross.
I find it hard. I think this is it's a detail that I struggle with. Discerning how to be relaxed, at ease, not getting tangled up in things. And I do an awful lot of that, I know. And being indifferent to the suffering. So it's how do you be with the suffering and recognize it's happening? And have that, in a sense, have that detachment from getting entangled without it being indifference.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't think there's a trick. I think this is what it's all about. We have to, one of those things you can only learn how to do it by doing it. You know, it's like any kind of worldly apprenticeship. It's only by doing it that you learn how it's done. You know, if you're a metal worker, if you're a potter, if you're an engineer, you have to just learn how it's done by doing it. And in our own life situations, where there is somebody suffering or a more general social suffering, and where we have an opportunity to do something, then it's as we're doing it that we learn how to apply it. For instance, those 6 paramitas we had today. How do you learn to help without the me, and the feeling of I'm superior because I'm helping you who are needing help, and so on. Whatever it is, we can only learn it by doing it. And by discovering that it's actually by not getting involved, we can often be the most efficient helper. If I give you an example, before I went east and became Buddhist in 1969, I spent almost a year working with homeless heroin addicts in London, around Piccadilly. And I was co-managing a centre for people living rough, basically, and in a terrible state. There was a small core full-time staff, that I was part of. And then we have volunteers who come in. They'd prepare food, they'd help people dress their wounds, find clothing for them. People give legal advice if they were in trouble. Whatever it was, we had volunteers. And my job was in vetting volunteers and keeping an eye on them. And you saw that the volunteers, sometimes they would start getting friendly with some of the people. And it was dangerous because sometimes they would start trying to help the person outside of the center's work. And cut a long story short, they were in danger of becoming addicts themselves. That's what happens if you're not very, very careful with all the guidelines that you need for doing that sort of work. So there were desperate, heartbreaking cases. At the time, only 5% of the people we were helping had more than 5 years life expectancy. They were in wretched states. So there was a huge ground for compassion. And when I was doing case histories and interviewing them, and you hear their story, how they ended up coming from Glasgow, from Ireland, ended up in London, and then things went wrong, and all of this. Heartbreaking stories, and you felt the person, how can you say, the good soul that had then got into all sorts of harmful things. So actually, the distance where you didn't let yourself get involved in a certain way was what enabled me and other people to help them the most. It wasn't indifference, it wasn't not caring. It's a skill. It's a skill of being moved, but staying lucid. I can't describe it. I can only say, it's something we learn. And when you see yourself getting involved, that's when, in that second of the 6 paramitas we had today, is when you realize the non-straightforwardness of yourself, how we are reflected in the life situations which come to us. How in a way life is an amazing mirror. And so once we start to see how what we're witnessing and perhaps involved with, because we are kind human beings trying to help society, how it mirrors part of ego or weakness or whatever it is inside ourselves. And that's a marvelous and tricky mirror, I would say. There are levels of intensity of taking life as a mirror like that. Vajrayana, it takes it very powerfully as a mirror. The Mahayana path, the Bodhisattva path, can go very gently. And we take tiny steps, but safe steps. When we really take life as a huge mirror, then that can take us to the limits of what we can cope with in our Dharma practice. I don't know if any of that makes sense, Rose.
That helps, yes, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Ken, I'm wondering if what you're talking about is the same as what one of my teachers referred to as compassionate detachment.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
And
it
there's
sounds good.
in the last course when we did the qualities of a Buddha, it says the Buddha's indifference is never unintentional. Now that was a specific example where it can look like the Buddha is indifferent, but it's because they have their skillful ways of dealing with the situation, and in particular with our own ego. So it's not the same point. I think what you said is perfect. There is a detachment, but there is the compassion. But sometimes, maybe I shouldn't have deviated into that, but it means if you've got a guru and they look totally disinterested in what you're telling them, it's not that they're not interested in you and they've got more interesting disciples. It's just that you are too much involved with your own story, and they're showing you what detachment really means.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Yeah, because, we go, I remember for myself, well, let me share one of my own stories. I was in, I think it was a 3-month retreat up on the hill near Samiling, and doing a practice. And I got into an emotional pickle, You do when you're all by yourself and in your room and there's only you and a horrible wallpaper, then you got to live with it, just shouting at you. And it was middle of winter, and then the heating had broken down. We were in sub-zero temperatures, and I had all my clothes on, plus all the blankets wrapped around me and a woolly hat. I'm there trying to do my practice. And I thought, I've got to talk to Rinpoche, I've got to talk to him. So I sent down an urgent note, please Rinpoche, come up and see me. Thinking he'll come straight up. Then after 1 day he didn't come, 2 days he didn't come, 3 days, and I'm thinking he doesn't care, and here I am going through this huge emotional turmoil. And then I look out the window, and I see this figure, looks like Dr. Zhivago coming up the hill in the snow. I'd never seen it before, but one of our nuns, Annie Pema, she was a very good seamstress, and she'd made him this beautiful black cloak with a crimson lining. And he had one of these Russian chapka hats, the fur hats. So I see this black cloaked figure with a fur hat coming, trudging up through the snow. And I realize it's him. And then he comes in and he says, what's the trouble? So and blah, 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 and all of this. He's sitting there smiling. And he says, lovely view out the window. And then he left. And it was almost like the opposite of today's teaching. He meant you've been there wrapped up in your own head, your own thoughts, your own turmoil, and just look. When he looked out the window, there's the rabbits hopping in the snow. And, a very beautiful snowscape, very peaceful. And nothing at all to say about my own involvement with, all of that. They were just showing what it's like to be relaxed, to be detached. And that was the most compassionate gift he gave to me, rather saying, oh, I'm so sorry, Ken, what's this? And he just smiling and laughing. Came in, listened,
example.
And walked off. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, well, maybe that's us for today. And so next week is the first Saturday of the month. It's our monthly Tonglen meeting. So we meet in 2 weeks' time. We're still with the Dohas. And if in the meantime, by email, you've got any requests, suggestions for the next course, or any feedback about this Doha course, and before we were recording, I was talking about how I was curious about the relatively low response there's been on YouTube to these Doha teachings, and I wanted some honest feedback about that, whether in general it's preferable that I do texts like we've been doing these last 2 or 3 years, rather than this kind of Doha teaching, which is much more unstructured. Thank you very much. Have a lovely fortnight and be well.
Cheers, Ken. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ken. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.